Hi, Andrew. Hi, Sandra.
Hi.
Hello.
Am I still on mute?
We can hear you. Oh, there's
Perfect.
Keith. Looks like Keith just joined us. Hi, Keith. Can you hear us? Maybe not. Looks like Commissioner Scissors just joined us. You able to hear us? Ken, excellent. And Keith, can you hear us now? Awesome. Yeah. We should probably do an audio check with you since we always need to.
You're high maintenance.
I've been told.
Great. Well, thank you, Chairman Tusky. I will look to you. We certainly don't need a quorum today, but have one. And I have not heard from the other members, Commissioner Gastos, Commissioner Cesuris, or Ms. Heights on whether they'll be attending tonight, but I'm assuming that, or today, I assume they will be. We've got two items on the agenda today, and the first one is here with our Parks and Recreation Director, Ken Sherbino, to talk about the Parks and Recreation Open Space Plan that was recently adopted, and then secondly, wanted to visit the virtual and how you all are conducting business from a meeting and workshop standpoint. So, Commissioner Tusky, we'll turn to you and see how you'd like to proceed.
Yeah, let's go for it. People can join as they are inclined if they make it, and otherwise we'll just go forward and knock through the agenda.
Excellent. So I'll just do a really brief introduction here again. Just did a part of that, introducing Ken Sherbino. Thank you, Ken, for joining us. My hope today was to really have you all become familiar with the recently adopted Parks Recreation Open Space Plan. I know a couple of you certainly have participated, I believe, along the way, but that plan was just adopted here in January 2021, and we're really excited about it. And there's certainly areas of that plan that directly tie into land use, especially when we're talking about subdivisions and parks and open space land dedication to other components. But wanted to take the opportunity to have your guys' attention on what the final plan looks like. And with that, we'll turn it over to Ken Sherbino.
All right. Well, thank you, Director Allen. Good afternoon. As of 5 minutes ago, as Tamara mentioned, I'm Ken Sherbino. I'm the Parks and Rec Director for the City of Grand Junction. It's really my pleasure to be with Planning Commission today to talk about our Parks and Rec and Open Space Master Plan. I do have a PowerPoint that I was going to run through, and I welcome questions along the way and input along the way. The master plan, although it's been adopted, it's certainly a living document, and there's a lot in there. So I'd be curious about what sort of priorities Planning Commission might have as we move towards implementation in the plan. So I'll go and share my screen here and jump into the presentation. Can you see my screen all right? Okay, great. Okay, so the City of Grand Junction received a GOCO grant in 2019 to fund the update of our Parks and Rec and Open Space Master Plan. The last time that we had done our master plan was 2001. We typically see in my field every 5 to 10 years updates to master plans. So we were definitely long overdue for an update to our plan. So we engaged with a group of consultants, very similar to what Director Allen and her shop recently did on the comprehensive plan. And we worked with the lead consultant, which was Greenplay, and they're out of the Front Range, and they have experience doing I think it's over 600 master plans across the country. So they're definitely a guru when it comes to this sort of process. They had several sub-consultants that they worked with. One was Barker Rinker CCAT Architecture. They were the sub-consultant that focused on indoor facilities. DHM Design was the landscape architecture firm, and they're actually out of Carbondale. They focused on the outdoor facilities. And RRC Associates was the survey consultant that the city's used on several previous planning efforts. You probably recognize their name and seen their surveys in past planning efforts. So they were our survey consultant for the PROS plan. So anytime I talk about Parks and Rec, I do like to start out as kind of a big picture, looking at the whole reason for having a robust Parks and Recreation system. I really try to emphasize that the benefits that come from a robust Parks and Rec system really are not just the people that are directly experiencing your services, not just the people that are having kids in swim lessons or utilizing the parks or trails themselves, but there's also just tremendous community benefits that come to the entire community through Parks and Recreation services, whether or not people are directly interacting with the programming, et cetera, use of facilities, et cetera. And that's the right-hand side of the slide in terms of building stronger community, more well-rounded citizens, reducing crime, reducing healthcare costs, being an economic driver, higher property values, business retention, attraction, et cetera. So that's a big reason to really focus on Parks and Rec and make sure it's as strong as it can be. So a little bit about our master plan process. We went through a pretty robust effort, although much like the comp plan, there were certainly some challenges with the pandemic. We did see a good amount of online engagement, a lot of survey engagement that really drove the plan. We had over 3,000 people respond and participate in some way during the master planning process to help inform the priorities. So this is just a snapshot of what that public process looked like. I will highlight a couple of the pieces. One is the statistically valid survey that RRC conducted for us, and that touched 2,500 people, as well as the statistically valid portion of it, where we had about 1,000 responses, and that 1 in 6 response is really a strong response rate, and RRC felt really good about that, and it went well beyond statistical validity. So those were some of the instruments that were used to really drive a lot of the priorities in the PROS plan. We did have the benefit of working in fairly close tandem to the comp plan, and it really did help inform a lot of the priorities that came out of our PROS plan. And we really worked to try to make sure that they were as connected as possible. So these are some of our master plan goals that come straight out of the comprehensive plan. And so we really tried to have as much connection there as possible. So I mentioned that we did this plan during the pandemic, and we were very concerned about how that was going to impact the results. And I think, and now that we are at the tail end and definitely light at the end of the tunnel sort of situation with the pandemic, I think the hindsight is that there's been a lot of really positive things that have come out of the pandemic related to Parks and Recreation. I think particularly the outdoor facilities have seen just tremendous utilization locally. You look at the river, you look at people at Las Colonias Boat Ramp, people at Corn Lake, people over at Blue Heron Boat Ramp. There's just tremendous increase in river utilization, as well as utilization of trails, the River Park Trail, a Lunch Loop Trailhead. A lot of our Parks and Rec, our outdoor Parks and Rec, really saw tremendous increases in utilization during the pandemic. We also asked specifically on the survey about what sort of implications would come out of the pandemic on Parks and Rec. And I thought it was very interesting that the top 2 were concerns about funding being less available in the future, and then also this increased appreciation and acknowledgement that Parks and Rec is a good investment and has a lot of value to the community. So this was a big part of our master planning effort. We did a inventory of all Parks and Recreation assets. And if you've gotten a chance to read through the plan, the full plan, that's on gjcity.org. And I've certainly worked with Director Allen on making sure that direct link is set out to Planning Commission members. But it goes into a lot of detail on our inventory and really capturing what we have in our community currently, as well as the accessibility of those components, as well as the quality of those components. One of the big reasons to look at that very extensively is to really identify areas of lower level of service. And and every time Director Allen or any of the planning staff contact me about additional developments that are happening, we look at this map about where are there needs in terms of additional park facilities in particular. And it really does inform when we are looking at locations of future parks, when we would potentially accept the parkland dedication instead of the fee in lieu, to really help make sure that we are filling in gaps in our system as best as we can. And again, I don't want this to necessarily be a monologue, so really feel free to chime in and ask me questions as we go along.
Ken, I have a question then regarding that last map in particular. And I'm sure there's models that help kind of create the darker versus lighter orange, but I look at this and I'm looking at it, in fairness, I'm looking at it through the lens of fear for developers and property right folks. And so out on, say, like by 31.5 and F Road, there doesn't seem to be any orange out there, and yet there's a significant facility in Long Park, as an example. Hard to see on Orchard Mesa, but there's a significant facility in the Mesa County Fairgrounds. And so, of course, we always have this battle of what is the city versus what is the county and facilities. But when it comes to where is the city going to put additional money in, because the use of those facilities in this particular dialogue, it doesn't matter if they're city or county. So can you share with me why some of those would be omitted or not showing up here, and help me feel better that this is a comprehensive look at how it looks or how it feels truly to users out there, rather than just the difference between city and county, or if it's not appropriate to blend those two?
Yeah, Commissioner Ehlers, that's an excellent point. That's actually one that our chairman of our Parks and Rec Advisory Board, Bill Finley, has harped on in terms of it's somewhat incomplete. And his example is a lot of the school playgrounds that certainly provide service aren't necessarily captured in here, because this really did focus on inventorying parks, GJ Parks and Rec assets and what we maintain. And so it is somewhat of an incomplete picture in terms of Long's Park and the fairgrounds, and to Bill's point, Bill Finley's point, not including all of the playgrounds that are throughout our community, because in our inventory, we just included the ones with the IGA schools, the school grounds that we maintain, of which there are 6. So that factored in. And we did ask that question of Green Play, who conducted this analysis, and their response was basically it's best practice in what they typically do is just to focus on the entity that they're working on the master plan with. If we had done a joint plan with the county or the school district, I think that there would be justification for also including scope for them to inventory those amenities as well. But point well taken.
Well, and I want to add this part of the conversation, because of course the master plans are great, and then when we go to implementation, it's always the how do we fund these things, and what roles do private sector versus public sector play. So in the same line that the low-hanging fruit is those large county parks or the schools, we also have development standards that require individual developers to provide pocket parks, right? And if those are going to be mandated by our land use codes and our development codes, then it feels prudent that they ought to be given some oomph in an assessment like this, so that there isn't this less or lighter orange area, for example, that now we go, hey, we got to put all this in there, and yet we've got a land use code. And what's particularly interesting is the Pear Park, the lower right corner of this map, and I guess the upper right park, right, the Fruit Vale and north of Patterson, a lot of kind of mid-range developments, R5, R4, R8 developments in there, and they all were required to have pocket parks, and a lot of that development happened over the last 15 years in there. So to see it without the orange, it's not wrong. I guess I just want to understand better that if we're looking at a map like this is really just about large parks. And for some reason, that's different than the dispersed pocket parks that are mandated by our own codes. So whether you can speak to that now or not, okay, because I want to hear the rest of your presentation, sure. But I sure hope that that's a conversation that we can have further down the line.
Yeah, Commissioner Ehlers, I think it's a really great point that we need to keep in mind. It's great that Director Allen and I are hearing your comments, because this is conversations that we have with the developments that are happening. We look at the full big picture. That this map is just one tool that we tap into, one of many. And I completely agree. There's service provided by many other providers that need to be taken into account, which we do as additional tools that complement this one. So again, I appreciate what you're saying, and it is one tool, and it's an important one, but it's not the only one.
Yeah, great. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you.
I might also add, if I may,
Please.
a couple of thoughts on those comments, Keith. Is one, certainly there are some small parks that have been developed, and I think I would use the term park loosely, in some of those pear park and kind of Fruitvale areas, but a lot of them don't have much amenity. I mean, a lot of them either are kind of dirt that they've never been developed by an HOA as a park, or maybe they're just turf. So we do, as we look at obviously this map specifically that Ken was referring to, but we certainly look and see what kind of amenity is also provided. And I would also keep in mind that at least since I've been here, and I certainly understand that it was a practice long before, is that most developers were not in fact asked to dedicate the 10% land dedication that our code, but actually take an in lieu fee payment instead. And it's just really been in the last couple of years that we've really started to look more, I guess, from a bigger picture level about actually developing and participating publicly in some neighborhood parks at some really key locations and strategic locations throughout the community. So I just add that, again, that has been the practice for quite some time, is just to take the in lieu fee and not actually look at neighborhood parks as it related to specific developments. So.
Well, I appreciate those comments, because you actually hit exactly on where I was hoping the conversation would go. This look at the grander master plan for Parks and Recs is an appropriate way of looking at things. And now it begs the question of, hey, we're forcing people to put money, developers to put money into certain things. And then those facilities, even when they do get built, they're not maintained, right? They don't end up being real valuable assets despite the intention of those requirements in the land development code. So it comes down to the conversation of, whether they're sometimes doing it one way or sometimes doing it another way, should we be asking ourselves, is that the right place for money to be spent in terms of, should it be in pocket parks, or really should it be plugging into a larger coffer, much like a traffic impact fee or otherwise? That's part of this bigger thing. Of course, the next element is, how do we do that in a manner that doesn't mean that because it goes into a bigger thing, the fees get raised, that it just is a better allocation of money that would otherwise be spent using our development code as it exists. So I love it. And if we need to further this a different time for more focused conversation, that's great. But I'm glad it's acknowledged that how these two pieces kind of come together or impact each other.
Indeed. Yes, thank you. That's great input. So jump into my next slide, talking about the results of the statistically valid survey, which again was probably the chief engine for public input that we got into the pros plan. So the next several slides you'll see have to do with the top priorities that the community has articulated to us that they want the Parks and Recreation Department and the city and the broader community to really focus on. And so the trail connections, natural areas and open space, a couple example projects that are in the pros plan. So we do list out a number of projects to the tune of total price tag of all projects of $157 million. And so on the next several slides, you're going to see some examples of those projects that comprise that 157 million. One is the Monument Connect Trail going from the Lunch Loop Trailhead all the way up to South Camp Road. And so that is a more near-term priority. And then just a continued prescription for collaborating with UTC and working on canal trails and the Riverfront Trail and the gaps that exist now, and partner with the Land Trust to pursue the fulfillment of these community needs. I will say that trail connections and trails in general are often the top priority that we see in communities and that do these statistically valid surveys on the whole look at the Parks and Recreation system. And it was very top high priority for us as well. As for the river conservation access and improvement input that we received, we have a couple of projects that are on our project list. And just for quick reference, if you are looking at our PROS master plan, it's on page 78 and 79 that list out all the projects that relate to meeting the priorities that the community articulated to us in the survey. So related to river improvement, we've got the Blue Heron boat ramp, and we actually had pursued a GOCO grant for resilient communities. Unfortunately, didn't receive that to be able to do that renovation, but it's still something that's very much needed. You got the Las Colonias boat ramp on one end that we manage as part of the Las Colonias Regional Park, and you got Blue Heron on the other end, and they're very different. And you can see why the renovation is needed at Blue Heron. So it's still very much a top priority, even though we didn't get that GOCO grant on trying to make the Blue Heron boat ramp renovation happen.
Where is the Blue Heron?
So that's off of Redlands Parkway. So it's so you're in a couple of weeks, you're going to see jam-packed of cars. There were several weekends this past river season where cars would even go out onto the parkway and had people getting out and unloading their boats and whatnot to hop on the river to float down to Fruta or Ruby Horse Thief or wherever downriver. And there's a major capacity and traffic flow issues with this boat ramp. It's been interesting because we did have a strong application into GOCO. I learned recently that Crested Butte also had a similar sort of situation where they had applied for boat renovation, but they were not approved either. So again, this is a huge priority that we're going to still try to make happen in the near term. The River Park phase 2 that would go from where the phase 1 ends right now behind the amphitheater to Dos Rios is also in the master plan, as well as additional riverfront improvement with the Botanic Gardens. A lot of people don't know that the city of Grand Junction actually owns the Botanic Gardens, but it's operated by Strive. And so we have a vision of expanding the gardens, improving the gardens, adding in greenhouses. We have a great new horticulture supervisor, has a background in greenhouses and growing all plant material for the city of Denver. And he has a vision for doing the same thing here in Grand Junction. And even in a year here, he's been able to double the amount of plant material that we're providing throughout the parks and throughout the public right of way, with about half the cost of what we were spending previously. So carrying out this vision on the Botanic Gardens would really allow him to implement that vision. When it comes to meeting the needs of traditional parks with shelter, picnic area, playgrounds, and grass, and neighborhood parks and new developments, there are several projects in the queue, several of which you all are probably pretty familiar with, such as Founders Colony. That is, again, to Director Allen's point in terms of kind of changing the focus of always just accepting the fee in lieu and really looking at opportunities where there are lower levels of service in areas that don't have great access to parkland. And instead of accepting that fee in lieu, accepting the land dedication And so Founders Colony is kind of one of the poster childs for that, since that area of the community is underserved when it comes to parks facilities. Same is the case with Horizon Park. Horizon Park is one of our 250 plus acres of undeveloped parkland that we haven't been able to develop. And we do have a plan for doing a master plan for Horizon Park, and that's up near the new fire station 6 near Horizon Drive. And so that's in the works for a master plan, a site master plan this year, and future funding in more of the near term. Columbine Park is another one that is a high priority, kind of on the east side of town. When we currently have 2 softball fields at Columbine Park, and with the pandemic, the utilization of that park had really gone down, and we saw a lot more activity from the unhoused part of our community in that park. And so it's really an important thing to look at, trying to reactivate that park to get more traffic from Parks and Rec users in Columbine Park. So that's another priority, as well as renovation of Pine Ridge Park up near the Redlands.
Ken, before you leave that category,
Yeah.
Can I ask about the grass aspect? Are we distinguishing between functional use of grass, ball fields, et cetera, versus decorative grass borders, in terms of water scarcity issues and just the expense of maintaining grass where it's just kind of sitting there to look pretty and not really serving a function?
Yeah, oh, absolutely. I'll say that our park superintendent, Randy Coleman, this is one of his passions, is to work on turf to native conversions, to really try to ensure that we're having water-wise landscapes as much as possible, and we're having a good balance of irrigated turf that's used for sports actively, and then moving away from turf that's not actively being used, and having that be more xeric design. So I think to your point, with a lot of these park designs, like for example, Horizon Park, that'll be a consideration as we go through that design process, because that's of paramount importance. And I'm very grateful to have Randy on our team to help us really be as effective as possible with that critical.
Great, thanks. That's awesome. And I think, the public is already being asked to, and will be increasingly asked to stop watering their lawns. But I don't think we'll ever get buy-in from residents if they, go to the park and they see superfluous grass being watered and it's spilling onto the tennis courts and stuff like that. So that's great to hear.
I appreciate the comment. So another priority in the PROS plan is, of course, Matchett Park, something that's been a priority for this community since it was acquired about 30 years ago. And the focus that we really heard a lot in terms of response had to do with this outdoor phase 1, kind of the outdoor central phase of the Matchett Park master plan. So this was master plan in 2014, and the full build out was captured in that master plan. And the priority that we heard in terms of needs for additional sports facilities and multi-purpose fields, for those of you, which is probably a lot of you that are well familiar with Canyon View, know how busy that place is and how there are really capacity issues. So the safety valve is really envisioned to be Matchett Park, and the focus of our PROS master plan, again, is focusing on this 5 to 8 year planning time frame, is really the central phase for field space. So that is a big priority in our PROS plan. We also talk about in the PROS plan about completing area specific plans and moving towards their implementation. So one that was in the works prior to the PROS master plan getting underway and being conducted was our stadium master plan. So the stadium, for those of you who don't know, is one of our primary facilities. It's owned by the city of Grand Junction, but there's certainly partnership, and Grand Junction Baseball, or JUCO, is centrally involved in helping us fund capital, from a capital perspective, the stadium, as well as some of the other user groups such as District 51 and CMU. And we actually are very excited to be able to implement the stadium master plan actually just had a meeting this morning with our stadium improvement committee, who's funding a renovation of the stadium to the tune of about $8 million. So we currently have $8 million in the budget to renovate the stadium. The total master plan price tag has all projects shown on the screen here at estimated around $34 million. And so the short-term focus of the renovation is really going to be on trying to hit the greatest needs of the stadium renovation. And that's going to start construction after the GJ Rockies season ends in September. And we are planning to be done by before JUCO, hopefully a few weeks or maybe a month before JUCO of 2022. So there's also other future planning efforts that our pros plan maps out, kind of like the comp plan. Had a recommendation to update the pros plan. We also kind of have the bigger picture of the pros plan, looking at the whole system, but also recommending these area specific plans. And others include a Colorado River Basin master plan, a tree and shade master plan that's actually well underway right now with the Forestry Board, and that inventory and assessment of our 37,000 plus public trees is underway right now.
So on that slide, can you go back for a second?
Sure.
Is that grass in the parking lot?
No, it's not.
Okay. Because that wouldn't make sense at all.
It would not. And I'm not sure why they chose green for that element of the renovation, because I can see the confusion. But the parking lot is identified as one of the short-term improvements that we're going to be moving forward with on the stadium renovation that's currently funded. And it really has to do with restriping the parking lot, and that's why it's highlighted here in the plan, and trying to get some more parking spaces out of that.
We
area.
definitely need more parking, less grass over there.
Indeed, indeed.
Thank you.
Good clarification question. I'll probably provide that input to Perkins and Will, that's confusing because they shouldn't use green. So other priorities that were articulated in the pros plan. So to the top one, so community center came in as the top need and priority from the community. So these other elements are other that relate to a community center, such as an indoor warm water leisure pool, splash pad, ice arena, pickleball courts, tennis courts. So this was part of the plan, and this is where Barker and CCAT kind of came in with their evaluation of meeting that top need that the community is articulating in the survey and in all the public process that we conducted. We did ask specifically about what's the location that should be focused on for further refinement and further development of a possible future community center. And Lincoln Park came back pretty strongly in support of pursuing that as the potential site for a future community center, to 58% to 21%. And so that really drove the rest of the team, such as DHM Design, to look at what that configuration might look like with having a community center at Lincoln Park. I think there was a lot of input that fear to interrupt other uses. Certainly you've got, and this happens all the time in recreation, as recreation trends shift, other facilities go up in participation, others decline. But it varies when it comes to Parks and Rec, because trends are trends. And so we really wanted to make sure to not interrupt the current use over there with the golf course. And so a lot of the focus with that input on Lincoln Park really focused on the site of the existing outdoor pool. So the existing outdoor pool sits on a 3-acre site right here. It's a 50-meter pool that used to be highly used by competitive swim team, by the college, by high schools. And now, since CMU has built their natatorium, Elpapar Natatorium, that need has transferred over there. So this 50-meter pool has become much less relevant with that change. And so the focus for a community center would be on this site, the existing footprint of the current outdoor pool, which again is about 3 acres. And other changes at Lincoln Park were also discussed. Pickleball courts, of course, came in high in terms of having needs for filling, and we heard a lot from pickleball players who are very passionate and are very enthusiastic in expressing their need for more pickleball courts. So the plan would be to basically repurpose the 4 tennis courts and rebuild those, and potentially add an additional tennis courts over at Canyon View, and then convert these 4 tennis courts into pickleball courts and really make this the pickleball complex for the community. We got the 4 pickleball courts at Pine Ridge. Actually, Columbine Park is also in our master plan, has 4 courts that are planned for over there. And so this would be the epicenter. So additional probably 12 courts, 14 might be too aggressive because you want to have enough space between the courts to add into the additional 8 that are there. So there'd be 20 pickleball courts, which would really allow a lot of regional tournaments and the like.
Ken, I don't want to take a lot of time with this, but I am a tennis player. And I just point out that kids don't play pickleball. That's and mostly middle-aged and older adults.
Mhm.
And by having no tennis courts in the one of the most densely populated family areas of town, leaves a gap. There are 4 courts at Junction High, which are almost unused by the public because they're almost unplayable. They're in such bad condition chronically. So that could be, a way around that. I don't think it's reasonable to expect kids to get to Canyon View that live in the town or on the east side of town. So I would just urge, looking at the demographics and the locations of available courts, and make sure we don't take the youth out of the tennis scene, because this community has a very strong tradition in youth tennis, and I'd hate to see that knocked off the table by going so heavily into the pickleball thing. Thanks.
Yeah, no, point well taken. And I think Junction High is one opportunity that is quite relevant because they do use they're a tremendously huge user of the tennis courts over at Canyon View. And so with potential plans for that school, the hope would be that would be a way to provide tennis courts in the community with this project potentially moving forward. So
Thanks.
Point well taken. Thank you.
Tim, can you explain at all, on the slide before, the community center is at the top of the list with a fairly overwhelming percentage of interest here. And that seems to be not in alignment with how divisive that subject has been in our community, and particularly with the data related to the vote related to those things. Can you speak to the difference between, I'll take just for example the vote and how that went versus this being that much more overwhelming?
Yeah, that's a great question. So yes, indeed, the community center issue is divisive, controversial, and I will say that my standard line is that we just need direction from City Council on what to do with that issue. We asked the question of our community, and this is the response that we got back. And so in terms of this being a priority in the pros plan, I think that's a great reflection of the fact that this plan is the community's plan. It's a reflection of the needs that we're hearing from the community. Now, of course, there is 37% that are potentially saying, this is not the priority it should be. Communities typically struggle to get community centers. I've definitely studied a lot of them, from Fruta to Montrose to Durango to Delta. It tends to always be controversial. And I think it's just a matter of trying to understand what the issues and concerns are and trying to refine and make the plan as strong as it possibly can be so that it becomes palatable. And we certainly haven't as a community gotten to that place yet. I will say that the vote that you referred to, I think Commissioner Ehlers, was April 2019 on a sales tax increase to build a community center at Matchett Park. and that was voted down by 45% to 55%. And so the plan wasn't good enough. It wasn't strong enough. There were issues with it. And so given the fact that the community has continued to say it's a need, I feel like it's the charge of the Parks and Rec Department to really hear those concerns and try to work with the community on evolving the plan. And again, it really is going to come down to the new council, and if they have a desire for us to or what the direction is from council is what is going to come down to. Does that make sense, Commissioner Ehlers, or do you have any other comments or specific questions?
No, it does make sense. I think your choice of words was spot on in terms of just a reflection on the differences here. And it's really challenging because master plans like this and the efforts that's going on here and the public outreach, this is awesome. I mean, this is such a great tool to have. And yet in the same way that the comprehensive plan and plans like these can sometimes be heavily influenced by a fairly narrow bandwidth or of interest groups reflective to the data presented by what is also a narrow band of groups that go to the broader elections. You just start to see these differences and how these plans are influenced, and being able to reflect on why this number might be larger than other data points out there. And I was curious if you had any other additional insight into that. And I'm actually very much understand where you're coming from there. And I think we all look to leadership on getting something done that's right.
Yes, indeed. I'll be very, very curious about what the new council wants to do with this issue, because there's certainly a lot of sensitivity around it, and we'll do our best to respond to that. And I'll be very curious the direction that it goes. So on that topic of community centers, so we definitely dug into, given the fact that we got a lot of response about pursuing a community center. So we looked at other communities and how they made community centers happen. So Aurora was one case study that we looked at that actually has recently built community centers and actually have done it through marijuana revenue. And so here's some stats on what Aurora has done to enable their renovation of one facility and 2 new facilities that are funded entirely through marijuana revenue. Other examples in terms of how those facilities made happen, kind of generally across the board, Western Slope. Communities build community centers through sales tax increases, including the first one was Delta in 1992 at a 1% sales tax increase, and then Durango followed at a 0.5% sales tax. Fruta and Gunnison were shortly thereafter, and Cortez all at 1% sales tax increases. So those were big reasons why those facilities got built. We did ask several questions on the statistically valid survey on how people felt about the community center in general, as well as how the community wanted to fund the priorities in the PROS plan, whether that be whatever the priorities came out to be. I found it very interesting that the community had selected revenue from retail and medical marijuana to be the top way to fund improvements in the PROS plan, and that tied to 2A and 2B that was just voted on a couple of weeks ago that passed. And now there's that funding that will enable us to start ticking off projects towards the $157 million that we have laid out in the PROS plan. So again, that was the top response, even ahead of grants and fundraising. In grants and fundraising, all these other surveys that I'm familiar with is generally the top one because it's free money. And yeah, absolutely, as public servants, we should be very aggressively pursuing grants as much as possible. We should be working with citizen groups on fundraising for improvements to Parks and Rec. Also on the list at the top there, number 3 was a tax on tobacco and vaping. So again, things that really informed the master plan and the action that we've taken subsequently. So those are all the slides I have. I wanted to just open it up for other questions or discussion that folks have.
Ken, on community centers, do any of them, are there any daily user fees or user passes or anything of that nature? Or are they free to residents? How does that work?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. So that was also something that was part of the feasibility study that happened kind of in tandem with the master plan, was to look at fees and operational revenues that we could realistically expect with such a facility, as well as the operational expense needing to run those facilities. So the facilities that I had shown earlier all have user fees that go along with them. They tend to be really focused on being accessible to ensure accessibility, because that's really at the end of the day what Parks and Rec is all about. Public Parks and Rec is all about. It's all about accessibility and being a feeder for many different uses, be it swim lessons to feed towards swim team, or youth basketball to feed towards competitive basketball in middle school and high school, et cetera. And so there are fees that go along with the utilization, particularly indoor facilities. And then those fees are really cost recovery that help offset the operational expense incurred in providing the service. Other questions that folks have?
I have a question, and I apologize. I had to hop on late because I had a previous meeting. Andrea Heights here. So, and I don't know if you'll go into this, but what all is going to be included in the rec center? It sounds like the pool is kind of the biggest part. I know in Fruta they have kind of a track area, indoor track area, and some workout places, or is that something that will kind of come down the road if it looks like, this will, be coming about?
Yeah, Commissioner Heights, thank you for that question. So the answer to that question is it hasn't really been determined, because we're not even sure what direction we're taking with this issue.
Sure. No, that's understandable.
That's where the direction from the new council is going to be very imperative for figuring out what we do with that issue. I will say that on our master plan, you'll see it at the website, there are floor plans described in the different facilities discussed. But again, those are just plans, in the same way that we still have the 2019 plan and footprint for a community center at Matchett Park.
Okay, and so once those are determined, how are we coming up with a budget for what this community center is going to look like? Because I mean, honestly, as a taxpayer, I want you guys to be a good fiduciary of the taxpayer monies that we spend. And so obviously I'd like to get the best bang for the buck. And so who's putting those numbers together? Because I know there's been some concern in the city council previously. I think council member Taggart had just wanted to have some more clarity around some numbers, just of like what overall cost would be, I think you even mentioned, daily cost to operate, things like that. So does that come about later once you kind of know what that facility is going to look like, and who's putting all that together? Is that you and this other company?
Yeah, Commissioner Heiss, that's a great question. So it is the private consulting firm that focuses on doing feasibility studies. So in 2019, for example, the lead architect was Perkins and Will, and they worked with an operational consultant that assembled the operational expense numbers, as well as Perkins and Will estimated construction costs. Perkins and Will actually is the firm that we're working with on the stadium renovation. Maybe that's a better example, because that's actually happening now. So we worked with Perkins and Will in 2019, 2020 to do the master plan on the stadium. And part of that master planning process was establishing priorities in terms of the renovations that were going to be most impactful to the different uses of the stadium. So they give us construction cost estimates to help inform the master plan. So the total project on the master plan for the stadium is $34 million. And we now have $8 million in funds that we have available. Now that it's funded, we engage with Perkins and Will. We actually even did an RFP to select the best architect and engineer team, and they emerged as the best. And they were also the least expensive too, which, to be a good steward of public resources, to your point, is something we always like to see. Not always in that situation, but thankfully are in this with the stadium renovation. And so now we have the $8 million to spend. We now engage with them for design, to do construction documents that would be put out to bid. And so it's real important to work with those firms that are actually doing this work, so their estimations when you're doing in the master plan process are accurate. I've definitely seen some communities not work with the firms that really know what they're doing. And then a community's in a situation where they go to a vote, a facility gets funded, whatever it is, and then they're way over budget because the architect that they worked with didn't have good understanding of how expensive these facilities actually are. So it's imperative to work with the reputable firms to make sure that you're getting great estimates so that when you do get funding, you can deliver on your promises and hopefully over deliver. Under promise and over deliver is something that I really focus on. And I'm hoping that we can do that with the stadium renovation that we're doing right now.
Awesome. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Of course, great questions. Thank you. Other questions? Okay, well, I want to thank everyone for having me, and again, our master plan is on the website. I'm sure I'll work with Bella and Tamara on getting a link out so you can see the more complete master plan, and certainly keep that feedback coming. That's what is really driving the public services that the Parks and Rec Department delivers. So really appreciate your input. So thank you for the conversation. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Ken.
Thanks, Ken.
Ken, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate all of the information and you taking the time to present today. Much appreciated.
Thank you. Everybody have a great day.
You too.
Okay, thanks.
Hey, Tamara, before we roll on to the next thing, I have to sign off a little bit early this morning. So thanks for everything, and I'll see you next time. If there's anything we need to follow up with offline to catch me up, please feel free to do so, Tamara. Thanks.
Thank you. Chairman Teske, I did want to pivot to the two other items on the agenda, and perhaps we can switch the order with your permission to really talk about kind of the conduct of this Planning Commission and how meetings are held first, knowing that actually last night was our first City Council meeting that actually welcomed the public back into our City Hall auditorium here. So wanted to talk both about the readiness of this commission to return to in-person public hearings and meetings, and then secondly, the readiness of this group to return to potentially in-person workshops. And I know that a couple of the commissioners have expressed an interest in doing some of the workshops potentially in a virtual setting. So perhaps we can pick them off in that order of the regular meetings and hearings first, and then talk secondly about workshops.
That sounds great. Tamara, thanks for that little introduction. I unfortunately also do have a 1 o'clock obligation, so we've just got a few minutes on my schedule, but I think it'd be great to get back to in-person public hearings along with the lead of the City Council here this week. I know we do not have a meeting coming up next week at which we might be able to do that, but certainly could do that in May. And at least it was my impression that most of us here were in favor of doing that as we could.
I agree. I think that we should move to in-person public hearings. I do not like the idea of trying to continue our workshops by Zoom. I think one of the greatest assets of this group is in-person relationship building, and you just don't get that by Zoom. So I know that was suggested at one point, was to just have our workshops virtually. I would be extremely opposed to that. I think we should go back to in-person meetings for both, potentially with a Zoom option for those who aren't ready to come in person.
I agree with everybody about the public meetings. I'd say I'm more ambivalent about the workshops, not because of COVID, just because, something in the middle of the day, sometimes just not having to drive and park and, back and forth. It's just more convenient and makes it a little easier to attend. But certainly if there were strong feelings, Kristen and others, I would, I would not object to it. It might be something where maybe there could be an online option if somebody is really pressed for time or might be out of town but would still like to come or something like that. But for the public meetings, I think for all the above reasons, we should get back to in person.
Yeah, I would love to be in person. I think I've seen you all in person like once. So unless I might have crossed you on the street, but I think there's just some different dialogue that can go along. And I agree, Ken, the convenience of Zoom is very nice. Obviously I was popping from one meeting to the next. However, I would like to do both in person. If we want to offer an option, I understand that as well. But for me personally, I would like to be in person for both.
I guess I'll chime in last. I agree with pretty much what everyone says. I do obviously agree with the public hearings and public meetings, but I do like to have the option of the Zooms for workshops, as people need them, or just to make it more convenient, honestly.
Chairman Teske?
Well, I don't disagree with anything anybody said. I think having Zoom options are certainly convenient. It's helpful for people who have tight schedules and things like that, don't want to make it down to City Hall. I do think there's quite a bit of benefit in meeting in person if we can do that. So meeting in person is, I think, to be encouraged, and having a Zoom option, I don't think hurts anything either, but hopefully we can all start meeting in person for all of our meetings.
Well, thank you for that feedback. Sounds like we will I believe it's a May 7th. That sounds right. May 11th. I'm looking at my calendar here. Meeting. We will certainly plan on that being in person and back in our auditorium here, and welcoming you all back for the first time in quite some time. So I know we're excited about that. And then secondly, on the workshops, it sounds like the preference largely is to hold those in person. I will say that the hybrid meeting where some are in person and some are not are probably some of the most difficult meetings to facilitate and participate in. I might throw it out there as an option just to consider, is perhaps we do, if there's an interest or a significant interest in doing some online, that perhaps one of our workshops a month is online and the second one is in person. That could be a way to capture both the convenience, but it also can be an option that perpetuates maybe some more confusion. So
something that we had done when I was traveling a bunch for work was when Greg Moberg was director, he would just have a conference phone number that I could just call in and listen to the workshops. And having the information, the material in advance, it was helpful because I could pull it up on my computer, but also listen to the presentation of the staff that way. So that may be a little bit easier than trying to do a Zoom in-person platform, is to just have a conference line number.
Yeah, thank you for that suggestion. I would say that our technology has improved greatly over the last year. So why don't we move forward perhaps with the hybrid option for the first few, and we can see how it works. Like I said, our technology is set up much better than it was on the front end when we were more in a hybrid situation. So we certainly can adjust as we need to if that's not successful for either participants that are participating from afar or in person. So happy to do that here for our next workshop, but we'll schedule that for in person, but if you're unable, we will also have a Zoom option as well. So well, that sounds good. I'd like to pause until we have more than just 4 planning commissioners for the second piece, and this has happened last 2 weeks ago too, as there was a fair bit of hearty discussion on the virtual neighborhood meetings and really delayed further conversation until we had a larger group. So we will continue this if we can, and I'll look to you, Vice Chair Reese, to our next workshop for perhaps a more lengthy conversation with the full group here.
Yeah, I think that it deserves a full group.
That sounds great. I don't have any other material at this point in time, but we'll certainly listen if anybody else has something either top of mind or something they'd like to see on a workshop agenda here in front of us.
Thank you.
Great.
Hey, Tamara. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks so much. Appreciate your guys' time, and we will see you here shortly.